So everything I ask, I already know. Just this is for everybody else. But let's talk about how you got into comedy and why you got into comedy.
I mean, I love comedy. Always been a fan of comedy. My family's very funny. My parents had me when I was a teenager, or when I was a teenager. That's weird. They had me when I was a teenager. So let's get in the DeLorean and figure out how that happened.
Yeah.
No, they were teenagers when they had me. And man, we were young and poor as a family, and we all were raised together. So, and thankfully, both of them had a really great sense of humor, and that's how we got through all hard things, right? And my parents are still together, and I mean, if it weren't for the sense of humor, I don't think all that would be true. I wouldn't be doing comedy. I wouldn't have two amazing supportive parents. But yeah, always been a fan of comedy. Because my parents were young, they let me watch stuff when I was younger. I was also I'm obviously the firstborn. So I always felt like I was being raised with the adults because they were becoming adults when I was a kid. So it's like they let me in on adult things and they thought it was okay for me to watch. And they thought I could take it, and I did. And I loved it. Big fan. I didn't know how to get into comedy, but long story short, after years of performing as an actor and a pageant girl and all that stuff, the things I had access to, in South Georgia, I was bartending for years, pursuing acting again in my adulthood. Nothing was really taken off, just a bunch of auditions that went nowhere. And I had a regular at my bar who started running shows. He knew that I loved comedy and knew that I was too busy to get into it, and he booked me on a show he was running and said, "You've got 2 months or 3 months, whatever it was at the time, to prepare. You've got to do 10 minutes on a show."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And as any comic knows, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Like, that's 10 minutes might sound like nothing to people who are like, "Oh, I can do comedy. I got hours of material. I've never been on stage, but I got hours."
Right. I see that a lot, yeah.
Which is most people who come up to you and are like, "I'm ready to do comedy. I got hours." And you're like, "Oh, cool. How many shows?" And they're like, "None." I'm like, so you got a tight 30 seconds is what I'm hearing. A tight 30 seconds. Yeah, so thankfully I loved comedy and I was obsessed over it, and I had studied it enough and had been on stage enough that like the stage part didn't scare me, and the holding the mic and the addressing the audience, which is half the battle, that didn't scare me. So I kind of studied it, and I wrote jokes about my life. I got on stage. I did a decent 8.5.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
Yeah, that first video of the first time I got on stage got me into the first 2 comedy festivals I ever got into.
Wow.
Yeah, nobody likes to hear that.
You're kind of a natural. You were born for this.
I honestly, listen, I used to be ashamed of that. I used to try to hide it. I think even in a few early interviews, I tried to like pad it a little bit more. And honestly, at this point, like in my late 30s, I'm like, screw it. I worked my ass off my whole life, like I earned that moment. The first time I did stand-up was the thing that changed my life.
Yeah.
For the better,
Right.
Saved me from a really bad relationship I had just gotten out of and a horrible job I was in. And I quit the job. I got rid of the ex, and stand-up was like the freeing moment of my life. So I'm really proud of it now. I used to try to cover it up, and honestly, hell, of course I was good. Of course I was good the first time. I had a lot of shit to bitch about. So,
That's right.
you know what I mean?